Saturday, as usual, we stream, and yeah, nice to have you. Nice that we streaming together. Just to remind, last time we had you with. Can you remind us what the last time about?
Previous time was in December, it was React query hooks. And now
Exactly.
it's going to be the little bit different aspect of programming.
Just before that, one phrase about this technology. So we a collaboration of people who really enjoy exploring different technologies. We do different meetups, talks, and workshops regarding all aspects of modern web and not web technology, data science, DevOps, backend, front end, and yeah, already Valentin is already covering some of those with the front end, with back end today. So super, and what's gonna be today's topic about?
Today, we will, like in Star Wars, we will start episode 1 of talking about NestJS. So, NestJS is the really nice backend framework based on Node.js right now. And today, we will try to review it from the high level perspective and try to build something, keeping in mind that you might be like a really newbie in that. Like, just imagine you're a new guy joining some company in some project which already has some SJS, and you get a new task like, let's try to add the new model, new functionality, and we'll try to do that basically.
Yeah, sounds awesome. What's your experience with Nest.js? I can tell I don't have professional experience with Nest.js, but I was exploring it myself quite a lot of in different aspects. We did workshops with Nest.js. What do you like about Nest.js? What's your experience and what do you like about it?
In the very beginning, when I just first time tried it, that was the whole reason was, why don't we try Nest, because it looks like Angular, and if you already has experience with Angular, you will not notice even the difference. So because it has the same concepts, and that was the first reason. But later I got when I did a couple of production ready projects for the different companies for Nest.js, I get a completed understanding about that, that it has that feeling and taste of solid framework. So if you just write something with Node, you usually end up having one huge file with routing where you list all your potential routes with all the handler functions, all the middlewares and stuff. And instead, as the opposite of that, Nest would guide you through building all your endpoints, guide you, and actually very strictly force you to build the different folders, different modules, and follow the structure. And that structure is something which makes me really happy about Nest.js applications.
It's very cool answer. I can tell that myself, I'm exploring right now the other modern framework. It's from rendering frameworks scope areas. It's yeah, I don't know if you played with it. It's the Remix framework. It's
Mhm.
I never played with a Nest.js actually, so it seems that it's very close to Nest.js. But I also like that comparing to React, for example, it has very solid structure. What can it do for you? What rules you have to follow, and then it gives you back a lot of things. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a point about frameworks, I guess. Then yeah, let's hear about the Nest.js. I'm really curious to see that.
Okay. Okay. Let's do it. So, as I mentioned, I had a couple of production projects with Nest.js before. One was the purely backend stuff with the small startup team Aqua, and another one when I was working at Mapbox. I spent about 2 years working with React plus Nest.js on the backend side. That was really awesome, and we experienced a lot of benefits from having Nest.js, from all those modules, from dependency injection, and especially from having the shared models. But we'll talk about it maybe a bit later. But the point is that the last year I have not touched it deep, actually. And while I was preparing to this meetup, to this presentation, I took my previously ready samples, I updated the versions, I reviewed that, but I didn't really reviewed everything super deeply. So right now we are going to have an experience of really what would happen with a person who will join the new project, and there will be an NestJS backend, and we are going to have something like the new task, and you will try to implement it. So we'll try to do that. But before that, let's just have a really high-level review. So this is the episode number 1. So we'll touch bases. We will not go really deep into how requests are handled. That's a separate topic, and I would be happy to talk about it next time, maybe in a month. We'll see. So today, first of all, we are going to little bit touch bases about the API in general. So what it means to have the good sustainable API. And of course, we'll talk about NestJS modules and the whole declarative approach. It's very controversial topic, but maybe Holy Wars will be later. And the feature model approach, which is the feature of the NestJS, which makes it like a framework. Little bit touch the dependency injection and a couple of options of that. Little bit touch the parameters handling, maybe not all of those, and try having the hands-on experience with modules, controllers, servers, and enable Swagger. That's maybe the best thing I like about Nest. So because if you just have the pure JavaScript and not JS, if you want to have the Swagger or some kind of that, you need to configure everything by yourself, and you need to maintain this configuration. With Nest, you don't need. You just enable it with one line. And the whole thing, which I will be showing today, is available by this URL in a GitHub. I created this repository when I first started to do the workshops about NestJS. So I needed to have some kind of the background, so some ready-to-use sample which people will be able to clone and play with it locally. So here it is. It has the latest versions. It's not perfect, but it gives you a sense how the production-ready NestJS application would look like. Only backend. So let's talk. Let's talk about the API. Usually, if it would be the face-to-face workshop, I would try to ask audience about what do you think about the good API? What are the features of the good API? How it should look like? How it should behave? But right now, let's just try to guess. So if I would answer these questions, I would first mention that the good API should at least work as expected. So if you expect endpoint to return some kind of response, it should return this kind of response and nothing special, nothing else. And of course, it should have some kind of convenient layered structure of the code itself. Otherwise, it would be really hard to bring the new people, and it would be really hard to onboard new developers. So it should not be super different from what you expect. Yeah. And of course, it should be documented at least on some level. Otherwise, again, the onboarding of new people and implementing the new stuff would be quite complicated. And of course, it should be secure, so it should have some kind of authentication. And also, this might be not the feature of every APIs, but when we've been working at Mapbox, we paid so much attention to the validation of requests. And this is something which Nest helps you to make sure. Performance. I have a really straightforward opinion about the performance. It should be just acceptable. It should not be even more than it's needed right now. Because if you're just building the crude application and you expect amount of users like hundreds per day, you don't need to make it super fast. You don't need to write it in Rust or C++. It should be just acceptable. And it should be fixed and solved by demand if you have the better demand. Tests, of course, the very valuable and vital feature of every API. Login and error handling, of course. So if something breaks, like some cruel guy would try to request something which they don't have access, or which breaks the API application, you should know what happened, and the API by itself should not stop working. It should keep working and just show some error. And of course, it should be able to scale. But that's kind of feature of most of the Node.js application, I think. And probably the last thing, it should have the setup, continuous integration, this kind of stuff. So having this in mind, we will proceed with taking a look to the Nest application and just try to think on the back of your head how these options, how these features reflected in Nest. Just think about it. So um, from the high-level perspective, NestJS framework would have these parts. It would have modules. Module is the kind of logical entity. The module is you can think about it like a folder, or if you're very familiar with Angular module, it's very the same like an Angular module. So it will unite the different entities like controller, service, some kind of provider, some kind of other classes into the whole entity. And the whole thing is first logical division. So it's very convenient to implement feature modules. And the second thing is the import and export. For example, if you have the authentication, it's very convenient to implement it as a one module. And then when you need to use any parts of authentication from that module, you don't need to import every little thing. You will just import the whole module and it's going to work. Controller is the basically endpoints. If you're familiar with .NET Web API, controllers in Nest is literally the same. So it's a definition of endpoint with all the declaration like the path, the parameters, the response type, and those kind of stuff. And routing is a part of the controller declaration. We'll take a look. And the last thing I'm touching today right now is the dependency injection and service provider. As you might know, I hope you are, dependency injection is the kind of mechanism when you make your implementations dependent on abstractions and not on the particular implementation. And it is needed for the several scenarios. There are cases when you really need to change these dependencies. Like, for example, you have service which doesn't know anything about how it gets data. Yeah, it can get data from the database, from in-memory database, from some other API, different options. And it should not know anything about implementation. It should just know the interface of so-called repository, so how it would get data. And that's why dependency injection helps you to provide the exact needed thing for that. And of course for testing. So it's when you use the dependency injection and your implementation does not depend on the actual class, it's easy to replace it with some mock repository or mock provider. That's super good. And of course, Nest has the huge amount of different things to support the request handling, but we are not going to touch it deeply today. So I'm not showing right now. A little bit more about the feature model. So as I mentioned, model just unites the anything like service, repositories, controller, and model can import other ones, other models, and export the stuff like services to be used outside. This is quite convenient. And by feature model, I mean feature from the standpoint of the business entity. For example, we can have user model, which handles everything about the storage and endpoints for users and everything like that. Or authentication module, or task module, this kind of stuff. So it's very good logical separation. And that's it. So my presentation is quite short, actually. So what are we going to do right now? I will switch to the web store, and we will take a look to the existing code of my template, my backend template. We'll try to review the different stuff, highlight a couple of things like controllers, parameters handling, and stuff. And then we will try to add a new module with a new controller, with a new repository, and just try to make it work. Okay? Alex,
Yeah,
what is
sounds
it?
amazing. Yeah, exactly. I have a question in the meantime. What, thanks for the NestJS intro. My question is, it's I don't know how close it to our topic, but if you would interview someone for the NestJS developer position, what would you ask? What features would you ask about?
Oh, that's a very unexpected question. But probably first I would ask about overall experience and what the pros and cons of that. And the expected answer would be like, again, about the models that it's kind of pro, but also it some kind of restriction. So it might be considered by some people as a negative factor as well. But I guess, yeah, I would ask about the models and dependency injection and why it's needed first. And then I would ask about that request handling pipeline. That's the biggest thing in SJS. And we will
That
talk about it
sounds
next time.
yeah, awesome, awesome. Yeah, I like in NestJS also the presence of all software, interesting software patterns that you can ask about on the interview. Like DDD is very deeply touched by NestJS framework. I think the clean architecture, dependency
Mm-hmm.
injection that you mentioned, and many other interesting topics. But yeah, let's go on. Thanks.
Yeah, just keep stopping me and asking questions. That's also really awesome. So the starting point of NestJS application is usually main.ts. Uh, it it is like a simple bootstrap function which has some kind of basic settings, and then it's executed by itself. The result is just the application is started. So let's review what I have right here, and maybe not touch every little detail, but still. So the first starting point is this couple of lines when you call nestfactory.create, and you provide some kind of module. And this code would actually create you an instance of the NestJS API, and you will be able to start it and to configure it to some kind of port, like it happens here. Yeah. So once you receive the instance of your application, you can call the function listen, pass there a port where it should be started, and that's it. So application is started, it's functioning. You can already uh, try to make a get request, a post request, and all that stuff. So it's kind of simple, but you need to provide some kind of module, and usually this is the application module. It's a kind of agreement between SJS developers that the very first root module is called app module, and we can just quickly take a look at that. Usually, it should be quite simple thing. So I have a couple of weird stuff here, but don't look at that right now. The only thing app module should have is the imports. Is the import. So it should import every other module, and it should be kind of a container for other modules to be imported. But also it can have own stuff. Like I have here, for example, a health controller, something which I can call to make sure that application functions correctly. So we'll take a look at that, and let's get back. So there are kind of additional stuff here, like use global pipes or global filters. We'll talk about that later. But for example, we can set up additional options like we are going to use just JSON with this limitation, and this is just a kind of a safety setting. But even if you don't have any of that, it's absolutely enough just to start your application and call app.listen with some kind of yep. And that would be. The good thing about the NestJS application is that, for example, if you are a really big fan of the performance thing and you don't like to do the things in the same way as other people do, and you say, okay, I know that NestJS is based on the Express, and I hate that. Okay, NestJS provides you the really good possibility to start the whole thing with Fastify. If you know, the Fastify is the analog of Express. Um, it's not like a framework, it's more considered like a routing engine and this kind of thing. So you can easily start your NestJS application with the Fastify adapter, and it will function slightly faster. And in most cases, if you have just a kind of simple application without any super specific stuff, that's the only thing you need to change. So all controllers, all modules, all services, everything else would keep functioning the same because they are not relied on the actual implementation of this. NestJS team, they made an abstraction level, and you can switch between the Fastify and Express quite easily. We're not going to do it right now, but instead we go into start set. And to start, I need to write some kind of comment. And I always keep forgetting all the comments. But of course, we have package.json, right? So we can just open the package.json. And, you know, NestJS has a good CLI. If you just start the NestJS development from scratch, you will write something like nest create or something like that, and with the application name. And it will create you the backbone of your API. But if you already have it, like if you're joining the existing project, you can take a look on the commands. And we have that nest start and nest start def, for example, with the watch command. That's pretty good. So let's start the second one. Nest run start back. Okay. As you already mentioned, the nest is written in TypeScript. And every code you have in NestJS is TypeScript. So it means that the first step would be the TSC compilation. It's handled under the hood, so you don't need to run TSC by yourself. But then it would run everything, and you can see a lot of logs, which I actually did some of them by myself, a lot of logs about what happened, like what kind of routes are available, and that, okay, Nest application is successfully started. That's cool. Let's get back to main TS and see once again what happened here. So we started the application, we created it. We started it in some port, and then we used the logger.debug to tell other developers that our application is started here, and you can make a health check here or access Swagger here. Okay, that's good. And we have it already here. So localhost health check status. Okay, let's just run it. And I will switch back to browser. Just a second, and open it in the stuff. Okay, API is working fine. And now let's, nice comment, thanks. Now let's get back and see what actually happened here, yeah, and why we have that. If we switch to the code and see the code structure which I have here, yeah, we have main TS, app model, and in the same place we have also health controller. And if we go to app model once again, we'll see the declaration. This is a declarative approach using the attributes, so-called decorators in TypeScript. And when you define any kind of module, you need to tell somehow to Nest that this is your module, and this is how NestJS should treat your module. So you use add module decorator, which have certain parameters like imports, when you import something, and for example, controllers. Controllers means endpoints here, and you basically can have a list of all the endpoints which would be supported by this module. In this case, we have only one, which calls health controller. It's super simple. Let's just go there. And how it looks like. Of course, it is a class. So everything here in Nest is a class. Actually, the good question to audience, and if you know why, just push a message here. Why everything should be a class? Why I cannot just have interface named health controller and perform the same thing? So think about it, and who knows the answer, just type it in the chat. That would be nice. So, but meanwhile, we have class called health controller. How it looks like? It has add controller decorator, and this thing would let NestJS know that this everything what's inside is a controller and should be treated like a controller. So once NestJS would do the compilation step, and then yeah, thanks, and then it would try to collect all the metadata for all the controllers. And then if Nest understands that this health controller is actually a controller, it would run through all the functions inside and try to find those which has add get decorator, or for example, add post decorator, or something like that. Because these are things to let Nest know how to function, how to build the API. And for example, in this case, we have only one function called getHello, and it has the decorator at get with something inside. So let's not look here, yeah? So it will be the second episode. But right now, the only parameter which makes sense for the controller is the pass, the prefix, yeah? And right now it is health. And if we go to this one, to the get function, get hello, it has decorator at get with pass status. What does it mean? It means that we will be able to call this function by having the host and port slash health, which is a controller pass, and then slash status, which is a part of the path for the actual endpoint. So Nest would collect all of that into a single route. And instead of having one huge routing file, as you would usually do in Nest or in Node.js, you will just add a different set of classes with small functions, and Nest would collect all the passes by itself. When I first seen it, that was a triggering part for me why I started to really work with Nest and started to keep digging into it, because that makes the whole picture absolutely different. So you don't need to take really care about all the routing. You just need to implement a function and assign some kind of name here. Yeah? And that's it. But how it works inside. As I already mentioned, that all these things, add controller or add get or any other decorators, would just, while being compiled, they would just put some additional metadata to reflect metadata, and NestJS would use it to build all those passes. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, no worries. I have
Hi.
a few questions side the remarks or something like that. Well, I can try to answer your question first, maybe. Um,
Let's do it. Yeah.
so I think it's because of nature of decorators. I think they can be applied only to some limited set of objects in TypeScript and in language.
That's absolutely right answer. uh, yeah, the
Yes.
whole thing is that you can apply. So decorator is still experimental feature. That's why a lot of teams, a lot of projects are still a little bit afraid of using that, even though if it's highly usable in the Angular or NestJS or class validators, any other stuff. But the whole thing about the decorators is that it can be applied only to class or class members like function or field or stuff, because it is internally it is connected with reflect metadata. It should have some kind of place to store this metadata, and the only current possibility is to store it associated with class, because
Yeah.
interface won't have anything in the result JavaScript, but class will. So that's why.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Um, One follow-up thought about that. I don't know. Have you heard about the TypeScript 5 version? It's recently, I think, in beta, if I'm not mistaken.
I have heard about it, but I have not read the whole specification. But I've read about the next version of Decorator's proposal,
Yeah, yeah,
and
that's
it's different. So I expect that Angular and NestJS would rewrite some of the stuff, because the next decorators would be slightly different. It deserves a
yeah,
separate talk, actually.
yeah, exactly. That was what was my question about. Like, so to me, that still sounds like because we use TypeScript. Yeah, the compilation stage would probably uh, mitigate the changes in a major version. But I'm really curious to see what's following up with this change.
Let's talk about
Please go
separately.
on.
I think
Hmm.
about that having the meetup just for the decorators.
Hmm.
So one more interesting thing which you might notice here is the constructor and such kind of weird stuff: private, read-only, blah blah blah, health service. What is that? This is how dependency injection functions, in fact. And in order to have access to some service, you do. in the convenient at the old time situation, you would have something like the const service and equal to new health service, for example. But it would mean that you will have the new instance on every class initialization, which might not be it's not const actually, it's private because it's class, yeah. But that might not be the exact behavior which you want, and you will have the hard dependency, literally like a hard-coded dependency, and it would be dependent on the actual implementation. So we don't want that. That's why we are using the dependency injection. And dependencies are injected in the constructors in Nest in such way. So you have the constructor, you define the variable, and you set up the correct type of the, in this case, of the service. And later, you can use it like this dot health service and just usage in any functions inside of class. In order to make it happen, you should make sure that this service is provided as either providers, as it happens here in this module, or it is specified as a provider in imported modules. That kind of important thing. And this is a first thing. And the second thing, let's get inside this health service. So what you see right now is an actual implementation of health service, which I'm using in controller. As you see, it's super simple. Just return some string. Yeah, so we don't care right now. But the important thing is add injectable decorator. When Nest see this one, it would understand that this service would be in the scope of dependency injection, and it would be injected for the certain modules where it is specified as a provider or where it is imported. So as simple as that. And since we're talking about the dependency injection, there are ways to customize it in a nice manner. So if you go inside of that, you see that injectable decorator has options. And these options are basically the scope options. So you can provide the scope, and it looks like that. So let's just change. For example, I want health service to be instantiated every time. So I have the scope, which is okay. What is scope default? Let's take a look. Scope default is when the instance is created only once and shared everywhere. So the default use case scenario for the dependency injection in Nest is when the service is created only once. I guess it happens on the application start, if I'm not mistaken. And then this instance is perceived and will be used everywhere. But there are options. So for example, you can use the transient, which will, so the default is basically a single one, yeah? And the other option, transient, is when the instance will be created every time. So on every call, before the injecting, the new instance would be created, used, and then destroyed. Yeah, and I don't know. I cannot imagine right now the scenarios for that, but probably if that service is used rarely, but it is super heavy, it makes sense to create it, use, and then destroy. For example, if it's like a very costly database connection. I'm just a little bit speculating on that, but there are scenarios for such cases. And the last one, probably the most lovely, it's called request. If you remember correctly, we had some similar settings for the .NET Web APIs. It means that the service would be, each instance would be kept in memory until this request is handling the current request from current user. How it works. The GET request is received by API, and the service is used first time, so the instance is created. But if we will inject this service in several places, like not just in the controller, but in some other places, if it is some kind of helping service, something like that, we will keep using the same instance. And all the single request pipeline would be using the same instance and the same part of memory for this service. This might be very useful when you are implementing the certain middlewares and you will try to handle and interact with the request several times during this execution change, for instance. But again, this is the next episode setting. So I will keep it per request. That's okay. So basically, we covered the minimal viable information for the newcomer for the NestJS. So we covered how module looks like, we covered how controller might look like. So for example, if I want to add the new endpoint, like get hello, but get database check. I don't know, since it's health service, I can have several checks, yeah, and it would return let it return just a boolean, for example. I don't care, and it just in the simple case would return true, and it would be at get again because it's a get request, and the path would be like db. Okay, let's save it. As you see, I have started the API with the dash dash watch parameter, so it would rebuild on every change. So let's just try to code. So the regular status keeps working, but here is our new endpoint. Okay, our database functions correctly. So as simple as that, we just added the new endpoint, which is also get endpoint, and nothing special. It's super simple. So next we just get this decorator and understand. Okay, I need to handle another endpoint, and here is how it should handle. Okay, and maybe we can modify it a little bit. So look, if we go to main TS, we have usage of logger. Okay, and maybe we can put something log here as well. So let's just make logger, and yeah, of course I will use the logger from NestJS. So it has a number of things provided out of the box. That's another good thing about Nest. So it already has some logger. And I would use the debug, of course, and just write db was checked. That's for you. And that's it. Okay. Let's update. Okay, it's built. And right now I will call this endpoint once again, and I will see that, okay, here is my logger message with a typos debug db was checked successfully. Okay, nice. So it works. So I will remove logger for now. We don't need it here. Let's take a look at something a little bit more serious. And yeah, what we have here apart from the rest of the stuff, we have also user. And I have folder user, and I have lots of things here inside. And let's start from the looking into user module. So as I mentioned in the very beginning, we have the feature module concept. So if you have some kind of entity like user, it is suggested to have a folder user and to have a module user, which will unite inside all the code related to this particular entity. And here what we have two controllers. We have user controller and so-called me controller, yeah, for the like my user. We have providers, which looks a little bit different from what I used in the application model. So it has the simple version of user service, and then it has this weird implementation. So the providers collection in NestJS, it can accept either references to the either types like a class, yeah, like user service here, or the objects like that, which would have two fields, provide, and it should be the type which is requested, like the class which is requested by consumers, and then what to provide, like use the class and use this class. I will explain. When I created this template a couple of years ago, I didn't want to make it complicated for the developers. So I didn't want people to find out the way how to spin up the Postgres SQL database locally in order to make it usable. but I wanted some kind of data storage. So I find out that there is a in-memory database available as add-on for NestJS, and we can use it. So that's why I based all this implementation on this in-memory database, and I use this with a layer of abstraction so that we can in certain steps that we can replace it with other database, and that's why we will replace it here as well. A good thing, since this is a pure TypeScript code, yeah, you can do something like that. So, for example, imagine if you have two environments, like staging and production, and you have this Enfin configuration. Yeah, actually, I might already have it. Yeah. Okay. Good. 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 So I have. Okay. Great. I can do something like that. So I can have different classes depending on the environment. So if process env not env equals to failing, I would use this one. And in other case, so guys, I don't have good imagination, so I will just copy and paste the same type here, right? But you can have something like cloud SQL repository, something like that. And this is a good thing. So, for example, having this technique, you won't need to support the actual database for staging or for local testing. And this is the way how dependency injection could be configured in NestJS. So you just using the abstraction everywhere. I will just show how it's used in a second. And then you will create the actual usable class based on something. Yeah. So I will, if you don't mind, I will just comment it and revert it to the previous implementation, like here, and we will take a look to the actual code. So this is our user model, and let's go inside the service and take a look. So it is injectable, so it will be injectable, and it has the dependency as user repository. If we go inside, it is abstract class. So we don't have any implementation for that, but we can use it as a dependency for other classes. And as I mentioned, here is how we provide the actual implementation. Right? So if we go to this one, user in memory repository, it extends our user repository and implements all the needed functions. Alex, what do you think about that? Do you have questions?
No, it's. I have one question actually. Yeah, if you go back to a model, it's. I'm trying to read it correctly. The use class property. Like I see providers, and I think providers is what the model. Yeah, export. Sorry, export is what would be available from other modules if they export this model. Providers is something that you declare inside the model. So what is use class in this case? Is like a declaration of one particular class that will be used inside this model.
Yeah.
In this provider.
Yeah, in simple words, yes. So provide or provider is what is expected. What is expected by the consumers of this dependency. For example, in use service, we have dependency for the user repository. And this implementation in the service doesn't know anything about the particular implementation of the repository. And when we use this construction, we ask NestJS, so if you will notice that somebody would like to have usage of user repository, please provide them instance of this class.
Mm-hmm. All right.
It
And the
works like
user
that.
repository. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got it.
And
So that's controlling the dependency injection for which exactly a class to provide as a dependency to, in this case, user service.
to user, in this case, to user service, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this can be used for different scenarios. So it's not like a 100% cases, right? Because usually you just have this. So you implement a class, and it would be used nearly everywhere as a dependency.
Mm-hmm.
And Nest would just, okay, if I see the user service as dependency, I would just take the already existing instance, or will create a new one of that and provide it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have the special cases, like you need to use some abstract class, or you need to manipulate even in runtime, or not in runtime, but when depending on something on the compilation phase, what to provide, you would use this structure. Or there is actually another options here. So I don't know what is use existing, but there is a use value. And here
Which
you
is
will
constant,
provide
if
the,
I remember correctly.
maybe. And here you will provide the actual instance of something. And basically with this, you will ask NestJS, you'll say to NestJS, okay, I will take care about all the dependency injections here. So just take this instance and use it everywhere. So I'm not suggesting use this until you have the exact scenario, exact use case for that. But provide and use class is something which we used quite a lot of times in the actual production applications for the different cases. For instance, I can imagine one quite real scenario if you are using the third-party dependency. So if you have some kind of class which is implemented in other library, in third-party library, so but you need to make it injectable. So you will create that wrapper implementation as abstract class for that, and then you will provide the exact implementation of that, which might be a third-party. So something like that.
All right.
But so there are variants, and also in export we have the same. So the format of providers and exports here in this sense would be the same. So in export of module, you will specify what you allow to use outside of this module, like this service and maybe even this provider. Yeah.
And again, you outside of this model, you allow to use this user service, but you specify what you provide for this service as a dependencies
Yes.
as a dependency injection parameters. Okay.
Yes, exactly. I can, let me just take a quick look. Yeah, actually it is here. We have another module which is handling authentication. We won't get super deep into that, but I just wanted to highlight that authentication module has import of the user module. So it would be possible to use all the things from the user module here. And I have here the user service, which I'm pretty sure is mistakenly added, because if you already imported the module, you should not have it in providers. So that's something to check maybe later. But that's the whole thing. So the whole point was to show that the dependency injection can be configured as just setting the exact class to the list of providers, or as an object with what to provide and how to provide that. So which class to use or which value to use. Yeah. Once again, I will just spend very little bit time to take a look here. So my intention was to create the class for user repository, which will be very abstract, but which would handle the basic operations like create, update, delete, get, and so on and so forth. And this is a TypeScript. So I created all the objects, all the like classes or interfaces here, and I put it in the same space, in the same folder, or as other user-related stuff. So if you go to user interfaces, we have an interface user. This is just because of this in-memory database, so don't pay a lot of attention here. And but this one is nice. I will touch bases about it pretty soon. And of course, there are some things which is really core stuff. So like paging, this can be reused everywhere. So that's why I have not put it into the user folder, but I put it into the core part. Yeah. Let's get back and let's actually dive a little bit deeper into the actual implementation of the user in memory repository. This is maybe not super deep because it's just an implementation of the that user repository, which has another dependency for in-memory database, and which will actually use that. So for the create user, it would call that in-memory database server to create user, blah, blah, blah. The same for delete, the same for get, the paging, all that stuff. So it's not exactly Nest related. It's just some kind of supporting code, the service, which would work pretty similarly as any other crude service for the production ready API. But let's get back to module and see the whole essence of why we added the module for the API. Because we need to provide a couple of endpoints. We need to make it usable from the outside by data consumers. So let's go inside the user controller and take a look. Once again, I need to just say that it's a lot of stuff from the decorator's perspective, and I will highlight what we are talking about right now. And the rest of stuff would be slightly separate, but I don't want to delete it because it's a pretty common situation. You get to the project with some existing Nest stuff, and you see the plenty of such decorators everywhere. So you need to try figure out a way how to not get like overwhelmed with all that and try to sneak peek the most important ones. So here we have the same thing, export class user controller, and we have the decorator add controller with some pass to let Nest know that, okay, this is a controller. Just take a look and create list of routes and endpoints there. Inside we have list, which is get endpoint, and here we come with a pretty interesting stuff. So first of all, of course, it's async endpoint, and everything should be async await here in this sense. Otherwise, we might end up in the stuck situation. So, and we don't want our API to stuck. So all the controllers functions should be async and should return promise. Otherwise, Nest would wait. We don't want that. And it returns the promise of course, it's not any unknown. We really specify what we are going to return. And I have created that special interface with for suitable for paging, which has the array of data items and the total items count. Yeah, so that the UI side, the client side would be able to build the paging mechanism for that. And we actually specify the type of entity which is returned. And in this case, it is user data transfer object, user data. It is class. It can be interface, but it is class here because I am using this stuff, API property. And if you take a look how it's imported, the API property is a decorator from NestJS Swagger. This is pretty convenient because if you will return the instance of class which has such kind of decorators and you have Swagger configured, the Swagger would show only these properties in its UI. And let's take a look actually. So when I just started, I have the special comment for myself because I keep forgetting that, like Swagger is available at localhost number of port / Swagger. Okay, let's take a look how it works. So for those who for any reason doesn't know what is Swagger, Swagger is the UI which can be hosted pretty in a simple way with your API, and it would work with Open API. I guess right now it's version 3, Open API declaration, the description of your API. It's usually it's pretty big JSON file, yeah, written in a special format, which will build this kind of stuff, and it is needed as a usable, lively documentation of your API. For example, for my API, I have list of all endpoints here, right? And I see there is a health endpoint, and actually the new one, HealthDB. I didn't do anything, any line of code, but I see that HealthDB endpoint is here. Yeah, and I can click try it out, click execute, and I see the response body and how it was called and what are the response headers and all of that stuff. It's absolutely gorgeous and absolutely useful for the hands-on testing of your API. And we try to have this, maybe not Swagger, but at least this open API definition for nearly every APIs. But for example, if you have just Node.js application, or if you have Golang application, you need to compile that open API file by yourself, which is not needed for NestJS. And this is the stuff I like. So if you want to just turn on Swagger, you need to write a simple function which will create the special document builder from Swagger. Just set a title, description, some additional stuff, add the configuration for authentication, and just call build. And you need to provide there, when you call the Swagger module setup, you need to provide the NestJS application, which is already started, already created, and you just need to call that, okay, Swagger module, please create me a document for this application with these options. And the Swagger would go through all the endpoints declared by Nest. It would go through all the special decorators in the DTO objects, all of that stuff. For example, if I go back to the user controller, I have the API tags here, which is used for Swagger, and I have API bearer as, which is also used for Swagger. So it's just a convenient thing to let Swagger know, okay, this endpoint would use the bearer API authentication, and please include the special settings for that. So you don't need to write a whole big JSON. You don't need to have the separate files with a separate configuration for everything. So just declarative approach for every controller, the same way. And then if you go to the user list, for example, I guess if I will just try it out, yeah, I see the error because I have not authenticated. And to be authenticated, I need to log in first. But yeah, let's try. So what I need to do, I need to sign up. So in order to sign up, I need to provide this kind of request body. So I have a login, 1, 2, 3. Yes, I have a password. Let it be 1, 2, 3, 4. I have the email, which will be 1212.com. And the confirmed password 1, 2, 3, 4. So, okay, I'm executing that, and this is a post request, and it returned me a token for my newly created user. That's nice. Let's just copy it, and if I remember correctly, in Swagger there is the button authorize, and you need to specify something like BRR and the token. Okay.
Column maybe? No?
I'm not sure. Let's try. And after that, I should be able to call list of users. Okay. So other endpoints which are something is wrong. Okay, yeah,
You don't need a
extra
bearer,
bearer.
I guess.
It was needed in the previous version, so right now they fixed it. So I just need to provide the raw value.
Quickly go to JWT.io and show us what token
Of course.
contains.
Of course.
And maybe I missed that part. Right now, it's implemented. Authentication is implemented from the box. Is responsible.
No, unfortunately, no. You need to implement the authentication by yourself. But there are a lot of stuff provided out of the box to support you, but there is no such thing like turn on the authentication. So it's something you need to provide.
So you have a login authorization module which does this conversion and creation of tokens. Okay.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah. We can have the separate talk about that, but basically, yeah, here is the content of the payload of our token, and there is a specific place in this API code which creates that. So if we try to execute user list once again, okay, see, we have 0 Oh, that's weird.
Awesome.
Yeah, it works, but funny that it didn't return the actual user, but it returns that the one user. But okay, let's not dive really deep. So I might have some errors and issues inside this code. It's like it was created a long time ago, but
Mm-hmm.
the point is here that the configuration of Swagger by itself is pretty simple thing with NestJS. So it's just a couple of lines of configuring code and just sustainable usage of the decorators for each controller and for some of the um, data or classes. This is awesome thing. I really like that. But let's talk more about the controllers. So because this is our topic for today, and we still have about a half an hour maybe. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the controllers. Um, as you see, let's first take a look at this one. So this is a controller called or function called get by ID. And if you see, this is a get endpoint, and instead, as a part of paths, we specify semicolon ID, which means it would expect that ID would be provided as a part of the URL, as a part of the path in the URL. And as a function arguments, we expect that the nest would provide the ID as a string. And to make sure that Nest would inject this parameter and would take it from the URL, we need to specify the decorator for the function parameter called add param. And in the same way, if you take a look to other endpoints, we can specify, for example, if you want the body of request to be injected as the argument to the function, and it would be this type. There is a little caveat, though, that even though if the actual body would be a different type, you will expect you will try to work with this type. So to make sure that the type and everything is correct and validated, there are different techniques for the request validation. So that's a big topic. We'll talk about it, but not today. The whole thing is there are different decorators for the function arguments and controllers, like add body or add param or add query. Body is a request body, obvious, and it would be the full body. And add param is the URL param. So if you want to have several URL params, you can have something like single user with this ID slash I don't know, for example, row something like that. It's absolutely stupid thing. Oh, maybe not row. User. We might want user from organization, right? Org. And in order to take the second one, we will just copy and paste another param, which will be called org. So name here should be the same as name here after semicolon, and this is how the matching happens. So the nest would match, nest would read the reflect metadata and would match this name of the argument with the similar name from the URL, and then we try to take this part of URL and put it here. And of course, if you want, you can make it like number, for example. But basically, yeah, everything should be a string here, I guess. I will remove it. Alex, do you have questions so far?
Yeah, I have not a question. I have a little comment. I think previously we saw one nice plugin. It's a little bit related to what you've been saying. If I remember correctly, that was this one. However, it's very specific. Not I think it's from community. So that one implements yeah, a lot of query get arguments for you, like you and it also binds this with a database, so you can nicely use types and they will be bound to
Good.
the routes. Yeah, it's a nice one.
Good. I'll
Yeah.
take a look, obviously.
Yeah.
Want to point a little bit attention here as well. So if you want something not from URL and not from body, there is the other part of URL called query. Yeah, everything after the question mark. So you can use it with the add query decorator, but there are additional possibilities. So you can, of course, specify just a property name in the query, but also you can provide some kind of, I would name it as a parser. So usually it names like a pipe, but I would even name it like a parser. And you can provide anything in the query, even like a small JSON. And instead of trying to work with it as a string here, you might provide this additional stuff and try to parse it separately, not as a part of controller, and already receive the actual JavaScript object of the actual type here. Let's just quickly take a look inside. It's very simple thing, very generic, but it's something you need to write. NestJS has samples in the documentation for that, but basically, if you want to provide the JSONs as a part of the query, you need to parse it by yourself, and you need to create this kind of pipe or pipe transform. Yeah, it's implementation of pipe transform, which has just a one single function transform, which receives the string value and which tries to parse it for the particular object. So in the simple way, we just use the JSON.parse, and that's it. And unfortunately, it has any, but I guess we can rewrite it to have it something like this. Yeah, but yeah, you need to do that. So this is a very generic technique. And these kind of pipes, they're also kind of injectable. So it's a part of dependency injection. It's basically looks like a service, but it is a very specific service which has the specific interface with only one function. And you can use that to parse everything from the query or even from the body, for example. I think that's also possible. But with body is slightly different thing. So this is how the regular controller might look like. We have also other verbs of HTTP here, like put with the same ID path. So put usually used to update something, and that's why I have function name update. And we have both ID, the parameter ID from the URL, and the body. So where I'm taking what would be the next value for that, and the delete with a separate decorator with the same path and so on and so forth. So delete would return the promised value, of course. So usually doesn't need to return anything. Since we touched basics about the authentication, I really don't want to talk about the guards and this kind of stuff. It's a really big thing. But first, I can just quickly show you the authentication module. So it's a separate module which need to import the user module because it would try to get the actual users from database and compare and see. And it imports the special passport module or JWT module from Nest. It doesn't necessary. It should not be necessary this stuff. So you can use any code to provide the same JWT authentication stuff. The suggested sample from NestJS documentation, they follow the passport module. But it's good, but not in every case. So I do not strictly recommend just using this one, for example. The only controller which is here is the authentication controller. Let's take a look at that. It has only two functions, sign up and login. So sign up is usually used when you are creating a new user, and it is free, so everybody can use it. It is just a post endpoint with this path. It receives the new user and returns some kind of response which would have the token because this user would be considered as signed in already. And the login, which is already secured. So with the login, you provide your like login and password, and you expect to receive the token. But it's already secured because it has that use guard thing. And the authentication guard is the special entity provided by NestJS Passport. So here we have just configuration for that. And to not dive super deep, I would just like to show the authentication service. It has a number of dependencies, like user service to work with actual users, so JWT service. But the whole thing is pretty simple. So it has a function to create token payload. What would we have actually in token? It has function to sign up, which tries to it's actually written with Zen. I need to rewrite it, but it tries to get the actual user by login from database to make sure that this is existing user. If there is no such user, it will just stop everything and throw an error. If it is existing user, it would try to hash the password and compare with the hashed password in a database, so this kind of stuff. And oh no, it's signed up, so it's not. If the user is not existing, it will just create user and save the hash of its password with some additional stuff. So the password is not stored, but the next time the user would come with the same password, the same hashing logic happen, and we compare hash. So it's the simplest technique. So we don't have the double authentication or two-way authentication here, nothing like that. Just return token. And login function, pretty similar, but it tries to get the user by login. And if the user exists, it checks the password. If the user is not exist, it just throws the unauthorized exception. Basically, that's it. So this is the essence of authentication code. It's just to reply to your question.
Yeah, I was wondering. You mentioned that the login is already on a guard. What exactly is
Yes.
checked on for the login? If we may cover that.
Uh, Basically, yeah. The authentication guard, is that it is actually a service. It is a service provided by the NestJS/Passport, and the guard itself is the special construction, special abstraction in NestJS, which helps you to verify the certain stuff like the request validity or the request authentication before the actual controller started to be executed. And here, according to my understanding, this guard would take the certain parameters from the request, like login and the password, and would execute the local strategy, which would lead to actually executing this function. And that's it.
Yeah, I guess it may execute something like validation for the fields that is getting from the form.
Yeah, guards are used for that as well, but it's a separate thing which can be set up really nicely. But here it also used for authentication. And I just opened that configurations, and that's why I don't like the passport stuff really, because to provide that authentication setup with passport, you need to provide a couple of so-called strategies, which are just classes implementing the particular passport strategy interface. And so for the local strategy, there is a function validate, which takes the login and password and which use our own implementation of authentication service to make a login or to throw unauthorized exception. The bad thing is that the name of that strategy is essential. So if you name it differently, it won't work. Unfortunately, they still have it. So, and the same for JWT strategy. So if you go to the authentication model, there is that configuration, like default strategy for authentication would be JWT. It means that it would look for the class in dependency injection, which has name JWT strategy. So you do not specify the exact instance of that or the name of class. You just specify the string name, and it is really easy to name the actual strategy implementation differently. So that's why that's absolutely not the best solution. Yeah, really. But as a sample, as a simple sample, it's absolutely possible to have that. Yeah. And yeah, JWT thing would just validate. So JWT part happens when you already have token, and you just put a token, and the validation code get that token as a payload, and just try to validate that this user exists. Yeah, and the token is basically not expired. That's it. And local strategy is used for the first login endpoint when you provide the name and password, and you expect to receive that token to be added as a header to all the other endpoints, to request to all the other endpoints. This is it. Yeah. So this is about the authentication, and yeah, we already touched a little bit about the stuff, and I mentioned like next time we'll talk about the thing. So next time we'll talk about the middleware, we'll talk about the pipes, about the interceptors, about the guards and the filters. Those all are the different abstraction layers for the request handling pipeline. So if you remember, and if you are really familiar with just a Node.js implementation, if you want to make something with a request, like authentication or validation, you just create a middleware. And you basically can have the chain of different middlewares which would be executed one by one. Nest take a step further. They created the, I don't know, like 6 or something levels of abstraction, how request is getting handled. And they created the different stuff for that. So next time we'll walk through all of those. And Alex, what do you think? Should we try to add a new endpoint right now, just to try it, or let's start with the questions and wrap it up?
I would say let's wrap it up. To be honest, I mean, we could say, hey guys, if you really like it, please try to implement it. By the way, if this code is open source, like, can we see it somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. In our presentation, there is a link in the very beginning, and it would be great if you can put this link to the YouTube description.
Yeah, it definitely would be there. Yeah, and for those who are really were following this talk, I think it would be beneficial if they try to implement the endpoint themselves, and maybe next time we can begin with that exercise ourselves and show that, yeah, and then we compare it.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I have a couple of ideas about that. So if we have the user endpoint, we can make the simple task manager. So we can create a task feature module and can try to implement a certain validation techniques for the task features.
Yeah, Valentin, it was a really great. I mean, it was a brilliant showcase. Like the project is super nice structured. We went through some basics, but also went, I think, a bit deep into some of the concepts already. However, it's just the beginning. So
Yeah.
I really admired some pieces of what you showed today. So
Thanks.
yeah, looking forward to a next part already.
Yeah, the next part, as I mentioned, would be dedicated to, yeah, we'll try to add a new feature model, but the primary focus would be on those filters, guards, and interceptors. And I have a nice picture about how this handles. And I guess it's, you know, there is a NestJS documentation. I really, yeah, let me just try to Google it.
One of the best
NestJS. I
parts
really
of NestJS framework for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it has absolutely amazing documentation. So it's super big. It covers everything from the very beginning. It has the initial thing like a first step, how to use the Nest CLI. It covers the structure, the regular structure of module and how it looks like. So even with tests, you know. And yeah, the basic bootstrap thing. In my example, I have a little bit more because it's a slightly more comprehensive thing. But if you really want to start from the scratch and try to get a whole taste of being an SJS developer from scratch, you can just follow these first steps and then switch to the my template, for example, for the other thing. And the good thing, it has the fundamentals. So, for example, it has that think about the asynchronous providers. That's very interesting. The injection scopes, we touch bases about that. The different lifecycle events, what happens with modules. That's pretty good thing. I actually don't know everything about that. Uh, I mentioned about the platform agnosticism, so we can use Fastify or something like that instead of that Express. And probably the most interesting thing, and yeah, why people hate modules sometimes is because of circular dependency. So if you have the user model and the task model, and task has the reference to user, but user needs to have reference to tasks, that would lead to circular dependency. And Nest would show you that you have circle dependency, and in this case you need to modify that how modules are organized to each other. So maybe create a third module which would have the common parts for both of those. So maybe we'll try to touch that a little bit. So the point is, documentation is great. Take a look at that. This is absolutely awesome. And about repository, so if you go to the GitHub, yeah, here is the link. You can just clone repository, type npm install to install all the dependencies. Hopefully it would work correctly because I have one outdated dependency. But if not, npm would guide you with additional commands how to overcome that. And just review, play with it. And next time we'll dive deeper into the filters and how request is handled.
Yeah. Again, thanks a lot. May the Nest be with you. Have a great weekend, and yeah, see you
You too.
next time, I guess.
You too. Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend.